This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. It's been another week of storm watching, this time a weather event instead of political storms, and we want our panel to talk about how Michael will affect recovery efforts. With just 4 weeks before the November 6th elections, we want to get a read on how it's shaping up, especially the statewide judicial races, and of course, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of our panel, joining us this week are Beavon, political analyst, Rick Henderson, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, Chris Fitzsimon, the senior political analyst, and Brad Crone, political and communications consultant. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages by our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Production underwriting support provided in part by the more than 65,000 members of the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Let's get started. We're still reeling from the impact of Hurricane Florence, the fury of Florence, and the mayhem of Michael. Our state's been pummeled in the last month by storms, weather events. Florence affecting primarily the coastal and eastern regions of our state, Matthew, the central and western regions of the state. It's been quite an event. We know at least $13 billion worth of damage was chalked up to Florence. We don't know what the number is going to be so far as Michael is concerned. Beavon, so far, we've seen another rare event, which is the fact that there has been very collegial a lack of political partisanship between our governor and our legislature and all the parties that are involved. Come Monday, they get down to the serious business of deciding how much and where to allocate funds for the recovery effort. What's your prediction as to whether or not we can keep that collegiality?
Well, it's clear we've seen a lot of state pride, excuse me, the likes of which I think even college rivalries wouldn't be able to tear apart. But I think we're going to see that the hard part comes when they decide how they're going to spend that money. We've seen Congress with the package from last week, and then General Assembly with what they've suggested, and Governor Cooper really touting the resilience of our state. And it's been made clear that through all of these storms, natural disasters, that the people of North Carolina are coming together both from a legislative and congressional standpoint to a citizen standpoint as well.
But Brad, I mean, what we're looking at here is we know there was $13 billion worth of damage ascribed to Florence. We don't know what it is with Michael, but it's certainly in the hundreds of millions of dollars from what it looks like. Where's the money going to come from here?
Well, we've got a $2 billion rainy day fund, and the legislature started the process this past week. You remember the State Commissioner of Agriculture, Steve Troxler, appeared before a joint committee in the state legislature looking at the agribusiness impact, Tom. That's $1.1 billion. Yeah. It's a critical crisis.
Our farmers were really just midway into the harvest season.
Absolutely. And I thought the legislature took the approach. They realized the problem, but they're going to be prudent in the process too. Chuck McGrady was very diligent in saying, how are you going to appropriate the money to the farmers for crop failures? And so the legislature was doing their job of oversight. Critical issue is this: they have an economic crisis in the farm community. all over the state. How are we going to address that?
Major economic crisis. Now, they said they didn't want to give the money directly to the farmers. How are they going to do it?
That's the process you got to work out. And there's got to be some type of claims process that state government works on, whether it's through the Department of Agriculture or through the legislature, public safety. They've got to get that worked out, but the farmers have got to have some type of relief.
Chris, the governor says that he would like to have $1.5 billion of the $2 billion we've got set aside in reserves allocated toward Florence relief. This was before we knew about Michael. And he'd like $750 million of that sort of as a down payment to get started on this. Now, legislators come back into session on Monday. He's got a list of proposals. How's that going to be received by them?
Well, it's the list on the ground. It's a little bit like, I hope they'll treat it like we used to treat the governor's budget with. That's the starting point. You can quibble with some of the details, and the legislature, I think, should look at all the details and go over this with a fine-tooth comb and have hearings and have an open process, let the governor's folks come and testify. But he sort of laid out a menu of how he thinks we ought to recover. And I do think the governor, who's receiving very good reviews, has done a really good job during this as being a leader, doing his job as governor. That's what we ought to expect all the governors to do. And so far, it looks like the legislative leaders have also done their job. So what we need to do is, now that we've sort of gotten all the cameras have gone away in a sense, we need to see if the political process can maintain some semblance of objectivity.
Rick, I said that Governor Cooper had been on television during the Florence event more than Jim Cantori with the Weather Center. In fact, Elon University's poll was just released this past week, and it showed that the governor got an 87% approval rating for his handling of the storm. That wasn't the case with Matthew. Has he learned some lessons from it?
Probably has, and as we've discussed on the show before, one of the problems with dealing with the Matthew relief was the fact that the Emergency Management Agency had been moved from the Department of Commerce and earlier, right around the time that McCrory and Cooper changed administrations, and so there were a lot of hiccups in administration. But the governor has been on television regularly. He's been in the hurricane zone. And when he came up with his list of items for spending for the General Assembly to propose to them, it actually, $275 billion was going to go to the agricultural sector, and Steve Troxler, the Agriculture Commissioner, said $300 million. But it looks as if the governor's actually was a little more targeted, and that might be something that would be easier for the legislature to work with.
I was going to ask about that.
One of the big issues, Tom, that I continue to hear from voters and citizens in affected areas from Hurricane Matthew as well as Hurricane Florence is claims management. How do you go through the process with FEMA, with Small Business Administration? So I think as a whole, one of the learning lessons we need to take out of the hurricanes is, how does government put together a more coordinated, structured process for impacted citizens who have claims?
And Governor Cooper's proposal on this was to establish a new agency. What's he calling it? The Recovery, and I can't find it in my notes here. Office of Recovery and Resiliency, to manage this recovery, so that perhaps maybe they can respond more rapidly to the feds.
Because you have people who are uninsured, so how does Allstate do it? How do the major insurers, Nationwide, State Farm, Geico, how do they handle their claims?
Well, another aspect of this, Anna Bevan, is that there's been a lot of media coverage about so-and-so didn't have flood insurance. And so, well, flood insurance from people who have had it and have been through this experience before hasn't been all that helpful. I personally have been through that situation. Yeah. It didn't do diddly hardly for the damage that we had. Why does the media keep playing up this business about flood insurance?
I think they're playing it up largely because it is a barrier to being able to allocate some of these funds. But more than that, we're seeing with Florence that people who would have never even thought about getting flood insurance experienced flooding. So it's almost a moot point because the damage is still there and their lives are still in this position.
There's no question about that.
Yeah, there's another issue with flood insurance too, and the fact is that we do have,
it's expensive.
We have our own plans as well. We have a statewide flood plan, insurance plan. And some of the problems with what's known as the beach plan is a big issue of who's going to be allocated the funds to repay and replenish these insurance funds when everything's over. Because basically, folks on the coast are very happy to have folks on the mountains subsidize part of their risk, and that's a real contentious issue.
Those are some of the long-term things that we have to deal with, and there's several of them. We talked about last week, I think, on the show the week before about local government sewage systems, which we used to get. They used to get funding through the Environmental Clean Water Management Trust Fund. We have the hog farm. Whatever you think of the issue, we have open hog farm pits that are in flood zones. We have coal ash ponds that are in zones. We have people, it's Rick's point, we have people who are building large homes on the coast knowing that there's a danger. Who pays for that? Do we need to rethink our environmental development policy? We're not going to decide these things in a special session next week, but we better start thinking about them long term because the storms aren't getting any less frequent or less powerful.
The public has already thought about it. This Elon poll took a measurement of that. 52% said it was very likely, 31% on top of that. So 83% said they think environmental changes are having an impact on our coastal areas, and yet in 2013, our legislature passed a law that said you could not use climate change or any environmental changes for local—
as a basis.
Yeah, to make ordinances regarding this. Should they get up with the public on this one?
Cutting our nose off to spite our face. Those poor folks in Robeson County and Scotland County have had 2 500-year floods in the last 2 years.
And Anna Beavon, they say that this Elon poll again, 76% of the people said they think that this ought to be taken, these environmental climate changes ought to be taken into account when state and local authorities were making decisions so far as flood construction permits and so forth like that. Agree?
Yeah,
disagree?
Climate change is definitely becoming more and more in the forefront of the public's mind. So it doesn't surprise me at all that that such a high percentage of people think that it should be a determining factor in policy.
Anything that stood out, I mean, Cooper's proposals included $176 million for homeowner repair and rehabilitation, $180 million to buy out homes inside the 100-year floodplain so that the people who live there could move elsewhere, $200 million for the uninsured crop and livestock losses, and then $75 million for hog farm buyouts. Anything particularly that you feel like the legislature might balk with or add to or subtract from?
Hog farm buyouts are going to be contentious, but they may be essential because, if nothing else, because of all the litigation that's taking place and the continuing environmental risks from the hog lagoons, it just may not be feasible for large-scale hog farming to take place as we've seen in the past. And it's unfortunate because it's been a big economic driver, but that may just be going away.
Chris, you've got a lot of experience hanging out at that legislature. What do you think is going to happen with this program that the governor has proposed?
Well, the key will be whether or not they can continue this bipartisan cooperation. You know, we are getting close to an election. I think both sides want to look like they care more. I don't think neither side wants to look like they're playing politics with disaster recovery. I think the big thing going forward, and Brad mentioned this, is a delivery system to get this money to people, not just to the agriculture sector, but to all sorts of folks, people who, the local communities who have public housing that was
and
devastated
interacting
in Craven
with the
County.
feds.
Right, and how all that works is very complicated. There's a lot of delays. The struggle will be to get this money to people in communities as soon as we can.
And that brings in Governor Cooper's proposal. Well, we've been focusing on storms and the resultant damage that's been created. We've got midterm elections, however, taking place in 4 weeks. With early voting starting next week, we want to update you on this year's vote. And since so little attention is being paid to the statewide judicial contest, we want our panel to focus on them. Brad Crone, candidates have been struggling to raise money and voter awareness since Labor Day. How much impact have the storms, both nationally and politically,
the in-state storms, Tom, are going to impact the elections with people who are dislocated. In particular, in southeastern North Carolina, we'll wait and see what the impact's going to be of a Hurricane Michael. But I'll submit to you the broader national storm at the national level with the Kavanaugh confirmation to the United States Supreme Court has been a bigger political storm here in the state of North Carolina. And
well, who's it benefited?
Well, what it's doing, it's activated the Republican base,
in
particular the Trump base. And what we've seen in the blue wave counties has been evaporating, in particular in Mecklenburg and in Wake County, and they are becoming very competitive races.
Interesting. The absentee ballots have gone out, and they're starting to come back in. Now, there have been some 48,000 requests for absentee ballots, and about 10% of them have come in, according to Michael Bitzer who is a political science professor from Catawba. He said of the 10% that have been returned, 23% were from Republicans, 31% from unaffiliated, but 46% from Democrats. What does that say to you, AB?
I'm actually really surprised by those numbers. The 10% of returned ballots is pretty consistent with
past
past performance.
This was as of October 9th, by the way.
But I think the larger absentee ballot performance by the Democrats is going to be a little sneakier than was anticipated early on, and there's not been a lot of attention paid to that.
That may be that blue wave that everybody's been anticipating. Rick, we've talked about this before. Is Trump still the big issue in this election?
Yeah, I think he is, and we had this pause, this very unfortunate pause, for most of September and now going into October with Florence and with Michael, that has kind of caused politics to go off the local radar while the Kavanaugh drama was playing out in Washington. Trump does remain a huge issue, and it also, what it does is it continues to sort of crowd all the oxygen out of the room when it comes to some local issues. Now, I will notice in some of the ads that have been running, especially some of the Democratic challengers in the state legislature, have been focusing and highlighting teacher pay, schools, and the like, and that mention has pretty much drowns out the Republican message that we've been raising teacher pay, we've been increasing school spending, but the Democrats are still pointing out that, well, we're not back to pre-recession levels. Well, I don't know if anybody in the country is back to pre-recession levels net spending.
What Trump has done, though, is woken up the silent Trump supporters. You want to call them the swamp people or whatever, but they have all of a sudden decided to wake up.
I don't think they would appreciate that nomenclature particularly.
They are engaged, they are excited, and I think they have an energy level that wasn't there 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago.
But the key to that is that people generally don't rush to the polls because they're happy about something that's happened. They rush to the polls because they're angry, which is why you see the national Republicans, Trump included, trying to now brand the Democrats a mob and keep people angry because they won that battle. And that also energized the Democratic base further.
Well, let's move from the mobs to the courts if we can. Nice little segue there.
It was very slick.
Yeah, it was very I worked on that one. You could tell, couldn't you? All right, so all the judicial candidates this time, for the first time in many years, are going to have to list their political affiliation. Brad, you consult with candidates. How big an issue is this?
It's a big issue.
So are people going to vote just because somebody's an R
absolutely,
or a D?
And it further polarizes our politics in the state, and you're going to see that in the state Supreme Court race.
All right, so in the Supreme Court race that you mentioned, because of the fact there were no primary elections this year, and candidates were able to file and had to list their affiliation, we've got two Republicans running in that race. One is the incumbent Barbara Jackson, Chris Anglin, a challenger who some say isn't really a Republican but registered that way, and Anita Earls. Handicap this race for us, AB, from what you're able to see at this point.
The gap has been far closed during the summer between Jackson and Earls, and Anglin entering in the race has really taken some away from Jackson, as we've seen in the past. But I think the real takeaway is that there are still quite a few people who are undecided.
Can we expect to see a big broadside? I mean, we've started seeing massive amounts of television advertising with these court races.
We're going to start seeing it right now, and what's going to happen is, I mean, there was a recent Spectrum News poll which actually showed Jackson in third place, scoring behind the undecided voters, and this is where, unfortunately, we may see some issues of Chris Anglin, who apparently doesn't seem to have any campaign other than he wants to clean up the judicial process. He doesn't really seem to.
Well, I think his primary campaign is he doesn't want Barbara Jackson to win.
He wants Anita. I mean, he actually endorsed Anita Earls.
Let's call this one the way it is.
He endorsed Anita Earls early in the process too, which is interesting. But I think we'll see a lot of money. And what Republicans are going to have to do if they want Barbara Jackson to win this seat again is they're going to have to convince people that yes, this is an important race. This is important to the balance of power in the state. This will keep the Supreme Court from going to 5-2 liberal.
I was getting ready to say this could conceivably really change the makeup of the court. Right now it's 4-3, 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans. If Barbara Jackson loses and Anita Earl wins,
Right,
then it becomes 5-2.
Right, it solidifies the Democratic majority, makes it,
How
I think,
important
someplace.
is that?
Well, it's very important, I think, as much as things end up in the courts. The Republicans have an uphill battle, not just because Chris Anglin is there, and as you mentioned, the reason this is coming back to bite the Republicans is that it eliminated the primary. If we'd have had a primary, we'd have 2 candidates running, not 3.
They got too smart for themselves.
That's exactly, they got too smart. But also remember, this overall is a Democratic year, not because the Democratic policies are better or worse, because of just the nature of politics and the Republicans control things. So this is the only thing we have as sort of a statewide election. So the electorate tilts Democratic in this year, so it gives Barbara Jackson yet another hurdle to clear. It's going to be tough going.
And if they don't know the names of the Supreme Court judicial nominees, then when you get down to the Court of Appeals, you're in no man's land. We've got 3 seats that are up there because of the fact that we had 2 incumbents, Anne Marie Calabria and Rick Elmore, who weren't seeking new terms. Let's look at some of these seats. Okay, in one of the seats, and they're not named by districts, you got John Arrowwood, who is a Democrat, who had served previously under the Easley administration, was defeated in an election, and Governor Cooper has reappointed him. He's facing Andrew Heath, who was the former budget director for Governor McCrory and the chair of the Industrial Commission. Any favorite in this race, Brad?
No, I would sense that Arrowwood would have the advantage with the base coming out of Charlotte. Very prominent attorney down there, active in civic and community affairs. I think Arrowwood would have a strong base of support coming out of the Mecklenburg County area.
We got 2 Republicans also running for one of the other seats. Jefferson Griffin, who's a Wake County District Court judge, a Republican. The GOP, state GOP has endorsed him. Sandra Ray, who is a 14-year district court judge from New Hanover County, also Republican. And the Democrat is Toby Hampson, who's clerked for several Court of Appeals judges. Any favorite in this race? You think the endorsement by the state Republican Party will make that much difference?
I think it'll make a bit of difference. I think it'll help clarify that that there's a little bit more understanding and backing behind Jefferson Griffin. But the entrance of another Republican in the race definitely complicates things.
Anybody see that different? I mean, the 2 R's splitting the could that also put a D in the
Well, I think that's a likely outcome. Also, that the other Republican is a woman, and in statewide elections, that's worth a few percentage points. So it seems hard for the Democrats to lose this, but who knows?
Okay, Rick. In the 3rd seat, we've got Allegra Collins, a Democrat who teaches at Campbell University. And handled cases in the Court of Appeals and clerked for Linda Stevens when she was on the bench, against Chuck Kitchen, who is a former county attorney for Alamance and Durham counties, a Republican, has argued cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, and Michael Monaco, who is a libertarian, the only libertarian in these races. And he said he got into this whole affair because he was just so upset about the 2016 election and the way it was held. Any favorite there?
This is one of those that's going to be hard to tell because, for one thing, you have 3 candidates running who have never served as judges before in any capacity, and they're going to the Court of Appeals, which in many ways is more important than the Supreme Court because an awful lot of cases are heard before panels of the Court of Appeals. They make a decision and the Supreme Court doesn't do anything with it.
Got just a few seconds left in this segment, and I want to ask you that recently the Supreme Court reached a decision regarding C4s, 501c4. We call them independent expenditure groups, that they have to list the names of their contributors if they gave more than $200 and if the organization, in fact, is supporting or opposing a political candidate. This is so-called dark money. We've wondered who gave to a lot of these campaigns. How significant is this?
It's very significant. It's going to put a light on the donors. It's going to out folks who have been given money. So it's very significant.
All right. Let's shift to the part of the program everybody talks to me about, and that's when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, I'll start with you.
Well, a lot of buzz in Raleigh these days. The Speaker of the House, an investigation was called for by the Wake County prosecutor. He's got 3 problems: a contract with the bond folks, a contract with somebody he helped get a development funded by the General Assembly or ordered local government to do that, and getting his girlfriend a job. Whether this affects the election or not, it's also conceivably could affect the election for the next Speaker of the House. This is a big deal.
Yes, in many ways. Brad Crone, tell us something we don't know.
The North Carolina State Fair opened in Raleigh on Friday.
A day late.
A day late, 151st fair. Our fair history goes all the way back to 1853.
Wow. Anna Beavon.
Rapper Kanye West met with President Trump yesterday, and I think the real takeaway is, aside from his discussion of criminal justice reform, was that President Trump was speechless, and Kanye West said that every time he wears his MAGA, Make America Great Again hat, he feels like Superman.
You know, we were going to have Kanye West on our show, but he's still lecturing the president as we record. Rick Henderson, quickly tell us something we don't know.
There's more shenanigans and hijinks going on at the UNC Board of Governors, and it's going to continue, and it may reach down to some of the individual campuses.
We'll talk about that on next week's show. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter and give your feedback. Along with reading my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. And join us next week for more balanced debate on the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Production underwriting support provided in part by the more than 65,000 members of the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.